Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to our root cause analysis webinar. I am Teresa Duncan. I'm director of REL Mid-Atlantic, and I am particularly excited about today's webinar. I heard Ronnie give this a similar talk on the same topic last year at the Mid-Atlantic Equity Center's annual conference, and afterwards, I knew that I had to bring her into the REL and give her a wider platform, a bigger audience to share her work with, because I think this is a great example of practitioners, particularly teachers and principals, really working with data and engaging in what is fundamentally that mythical beast, that data-driven decision making. So I'm very happy that Ronnie agreed to take time out of her busy schedule to join us and deliver this presentation. So just a few words about today's agenda, a little bit of an outline. I'll do some introductions, and then Ronnie will do her presentation. As the introductory piece indicated, we will ask you to participate in various polls. We'll also have several question and answer periods, and then we'll wrap it up and invite you to give us your thoughts and feedback on how today went. And so, without further ado, let me welcome Ronnie Silverstein. Ronnie is a veteran educator with over 40 years of experience. She is currently principal of Fallsmead Elementary School in Montgomery County, Maryland. And before coming to Fallsmead, she served multiple roles, including special education teacher, special education coordinator. She was principal of Clopper Mill Elementary School and Director of Elementary Leadership for Montgomery County Public Schools. She is a very experienced staff developer, and so this today is another example of her staff development skills. And she has conducted workshops for the U.S. Department of Education's Office of English Language Acquisition, the National Staff Development Council, and many other organizations. She is also the co-author of a book, Innovative Voices in Education, Engaging Diverse Communities. Also on the line today, and joining us for the discussion portions of today's webinar, is one of the registrants, Jeff Hewitt, who is principal of Lambertville Public School in New Jersey. And so I'd like to turn it over to Ronnie and welcome all the participants who are online with us today. Ronnie, I think we're having a little trouble hearing you.
Hello?
There you
Can
go.
you hear?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Good afternoon, everyone. As I was saying, I'm very excited to get started on the webinar. I have some of my staff here, and I wanted to welcome Jeff Hewitt, and hope that he could say hello for 1 second so I can hear him.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good
Great
afternoon.
to be here. Thank you.
Yes. The very first thing we're going to start with is we're going to poll the audience and find out who exactly is here. I can see all your names actually on my screen, but I'm really curious as to whether you're a teacher, a school administrator, a district administrator, exactly what your experience is. So if you wouldn't mind filling that out for me, it will give me a little bit of an understanding of who I'm talking to. Some of you may not fit in those categories, and you should be able to see a little screen. If it's other, you can actually type in your information. All right. It looks like the majority are falling under the other category, which is really fun and interesting. Lots of state agencies, researchers, elementary math coaches, higher education, faculty. So we have a really broad range, and that'll make the discussion even more exciting. I guess we're ready to go on to the next slide. So the first question, and I'm going to ask Jeff to answer it first, is really what is the process that you use in your school to develop your school improvement plan? Here in Montgomery County, one of our important jobs as a leader is to lead the school in creating a school improvement plan, to look at data and decide what the focus of the school is going to be for the next year. So in your workplace, in your districts, what is the process that is followed to develop a school improvement plan? We're
Sure.
polling
We
you.
actually,
Go ahead,
do you want me
Jeff.
to go ahead and answer that now?
Sure.
Okay. Well, basically in Lambertville, what we do is we work through a committee. It's a process that we use a variety of teachers. We try to get a primary level teacher, special education teacher, related arts teacher, and an upper grade teacher. We're a pre-K through 6th grade district. So together with myself chairing the committee, myself and a group of teachers, we create surveys that go out to students, fellow staff members, as well as out to the parent community. And then we collect that data and we analyze it and create our school improvement plan from there.
Right. I'm wondering whether the other participants can hear Jeff.
Yes, it looks like they can.
All right, very good.
Okay, great.
So what Jeff is saying is very common. People get together and they bring representation from across the school, and they look at data and they come up with a plan. That's not unlike what we do. We bring our leadership team to start, and then we bring it back to the entire staff. What's really what's going to be the focus of today is what exactly do we do with that team when we're looking at the data. The essential question that I'm really going to address today is why is root cause analysis a key to effective instructional leadership? You will see of the school, how it affects how everyone thinks about the children, and it really is the key to success. The beliefs that this type of analysis brings is that leadership is key to school improvement. A leader has to bring that school improvement knowledge, but also the idea that change and improvement is continuous. It doesn't just happen and then we leave it be. We're always looking. School improvement is also an adaptive challenge, and I'm going to be talking a lot about adaptive learning and adaptive challenge. It's a phrase that Dr. Ronald Heifetz from Harvard has coined, and it really involves a change in beliefs, but it also is something that we need to know new ideas. So all improvement that is adaptive involves change and new learning. It's not, the know-how isn't there, so we have to create new learning, and it may involve staff development. It may be an understanding that we don't know what to do and we have to find new people to help us. Teachers are the instructional decision makers. The leaders in the school are not in the classroom every day. The teachers have to make the change, and so they have to be part of this system, this process, but they also have to believe in what they're doing. Otherwise, they're going to go back to their rooms and the same things are going to happen. That's why I say collaboration is powerful and essential for this. Data is just a tool. It's not an end. So we're just going to use data as the beginning part, and then we're going to ask a lot of questions to figure out what is the data saying and what isn't it saying, and what do we need to find. So all in all, identifying these root causes is crucial to making these informed decisions. There are lots of methods for conducting root cause analysis. We're going to primarily be talking today about drilling down process, but I will also take a quick look at the 5 whys. There's also something called case in point and ORID, and many people use ORID for short-term, quick changes. So going back to this whole idea of adaptive challenge, an adaptive challenge is a particular kind of problem solving where the gap cannot be closed by the application of current know-how. So we don't know what to do. If we did, we would fix it. That's called a technical challenge. If you look at this chart, try to find my little pointer. If you look at this chart, you see that a technical challenge has a clear problem and a clear solution, and the people in authority can just make the change. You don't need a committee to make a change that you already know how to do, and that's a simple technical problem. An example of this might be if you're in a large school and there's an elevator that's broken, you don't need a committee to know how to fix it. You get yourself maintenance person, and they come in and they help you fix it. There are some challenges, and many in schools, that are a little bit technical and a little bit adaptive. You exactly know what the problem is. You do have to learn a little bit, but you still need the teachers and the administrators or the director and the employees to get together and figure out what to do. An adaptive challenge is the most common kinds of challenge when we're talking about school improvement, because we're talking about children, we're talking about learning, and rarely is the pathway clear. The problem may not be completely out there, and that's why we go to root cause. You don't often just absolutely know, why are my ESOL students' data going down? We don't know exactly what the problem is. And the solution, when it's an adaptive challenge, often requires new learning. Maybe we need to learn how to teach those children more effectively. And the locus of the work has to be the stakeholders, the teachers, or the people who are closest to the problem. And that's really, those parameters really create what we call an adaptive challenge. An example of that is my leadership team just this week met, and we're still looking at our school improvement plan, and some of our targeted students who are ESOL students are still lagging behind, despite the fact that we've put all kinds of interventions in place. Well, we really probably need new learning. We need some new ideas of what it is that they need to learn, and that is something that we're going to have to explore. So often, Heifetz often calls adaptive leadership dangerous. One of his books that I list in my bibliography talks about the danger of leadership. And it's because it's easier if you're really struggling. You want somebody to fix the problem for you. And so it becomes somewhere where the staff wants the leadership to come up with a solution, tell me what to do. And unfortunately, that's not going to always help. The key to identifying whether the student need is an adaptive challenge is whether there's the current know-how, as I told you. Or sometimes there's some beliefs and skills that have to be modified. The people who are closest, as I told you, must be a part of the solution if the change is to occur. When people are faced with challenges that affect their work and their beliefs, it's the leader that must create a safe environment free from blame so that those involved will be able to look at the problem with open minds. Often during these root cause analysis discussions, it may be that some of us, including the leaders, are doing something wrong or not doing something that could cause the children to learn better. That's not something to blame. It's just something that we have to fix. It's something that we have to work on, and we work on it together. So part of the skill of the leader is to create a climate where people feel free to say, you know what, I don't really know what to do anymore. We're really at a loss, and let's work on this together. The biggest error that I have seen in school improvement is when teachers and leaders treat adaptive challenges as if they were technical problems. Quickly coming up with a solution just by looking at a piece of data and not doing the collaborative work, not looking deeply, often causes you to solve the wrong problem. I wish I could say that doing root cause analysis always causes you to create success in the end. I think that root cause always helps us to find what's happening, what's wrong, but we don't always have the solution even once we are in the right neighborhood. It doesn't mean that we have the answers yet, but at least we're going down the right street. So let's take a look at a couple of different examples of what I'm talking about. In Montgomery County, there used to be a social studies or a history course called the National, State, and Local course, and government, national, state, and local government. And in this particular high school, you can see what the data looked like from 2007 to 2009. There was dramatic decline in the number of students passing the exam. These are percentages, and you can see that it went down from 88% down to a little above 78%. And the school really needed to decide what are they going to do and what caused this to happen. The principal reported to me that they sat down and they convened a group similar to what Jeff had described, and they talked about what the factors are that might be impacting student achievement. So we're going to try for a few minutes for you to think about what are some things that teachers might have said are impacting the teacher's learning. So there's a data discussion that we're going to have, and what do you think they might have come up with? Well, pretty much you're all right. You've come up with some excellent ideas. They talked about no supports at home, lack of knowledge, change in student population, which actually did happen. The demographics changed. Attendance, they blame the lower grade teachers. I don't know if they did that one, but that's a good one. They weren't studying enough, no support. Assessment didn't match the curriculum, change in staffing, change in state curriculum. Excellent, excellent ideas. Let me show you some of the ones that they did actually come up with. We can go on to the next slide. So some of the things they said are exactly as you had described. Student population has changed. There was a staff turnover, class size. Students have not mastered English, student attendance. Students were not learning the curriculum, lack of parent support. Students are not studying enough for the test. So they decided that they were going to look at the one that's in green. Students are not studying enough for the test. They felt that of all of these, that was the most powerful to them, and really something that they thought they could work on. So they said that the NSL scores had declined over the past 3 years. And they asked these 5 whys. Why are the test scores declining? They said students aren't studying enough for the test. And then they said, well, why aren't they studying enough for the test? And they said that they felt that the review materials, as they looked at them, they found that the review materials were inadequate. And then they said, well, why are the review materials inadequate? And they figured out that the first semester content was underemphasized in that material. Why is that? And the second semester teachers are responsible for the review, and they were really only putting in review for the second semester, even though the test tested the entire year. So had they not really delved into all of these answers, what the teachers had told the principal was, well, they weren't studying for the test. Why don't we have an after-school study session since they're not studying? However, that really wasn't the problem. They found that as they looked at the actual tests, that the students did very well on the material from second semester. So apparently, kids were studying, but really what was happening was they weren't given the proper material to review. That shows us that delving a little bit deeper in this particular case really helped them to understand the actual issue and not come up with a solution that would have gotten them back in the same place. I see that somebody says you don't see how that changed, though, without the teachers changing. I think that what happened was that there were teachers who were changing, and the point really is that there were different teachers teaching first semester and second semester, and when the second semester teachers created the test, apparently they didn't collaborate, and that's what ended up. But it took a discussion and a looking at the test to really really figure out what was going on. Here's another example where we're going to use Orange Grove to really delve into the drilling down process. Orange Grove is a fake name, but a real school in Maryland, in a different county than ours. And these are 2010 Maryland State assessments, end-of-the-year assessments. You can see the different subgroups. You can see the bars and the whiskers. In this particular reading proficiency, you can see that all the green are where those subgroups passed the test. The annual AMO for that year was 81.2%. That's the line up at top. The bar, the African American bar, where there's hashtags, means that they made proficiency with a confidence level. You can see the whiskers are just touching. They're in danger. However, the special ed bar, they did not make AYP. So we're going to look at this, and we're also going to look at math, and we're going to try to decide what does the data tell us and what doesn't it tell us, because that's really the key to getting into the real discussions. We've got, in Maryland, you can see there's an LEP section right there on here, but when there's less than 5 in the cohort, they don't report scores. That's why you don't see LEP or Asian in this particular school. This one is math, and the same thing, African American did make AYP, but in this case, the special ed is just making it by confidence level. So again, what can we glean from this? What can we say we know, and what can we say we don't know? What do these data not tell us? And can student achievement plan be devised from just these data? Now, these are the state end data, and many times leadership will look at these and they will make a decision for the following year based on that. So, Jeff?
Yeah.
Do you use this type of data for your end of the year or beginning the year planning?
We've begun to use more of this type of data than we have in the past, but I will say we're relatively new to using this type of data. We've created our own district benchmark assessments and things in addition to our state assessments that we use periodically fall and spring, and we do look at different subgroups and populations.
Right, right.
So I guess we do, but it's relatively new for us.
Okay. Well, we have been using this sort of data for quite some time as Maryland has been participating in this MSA. And what we really want to look at is that we can make some quick judgments about what's happening based on these kinds of scores, but it really doesn't tell most of the picture. It's a
That was
jumping.
one thing that I'm
Go ahead.
sorry, I was just going to say, you had asked me about the data and just kind of chime in and say that a lot of what you don't see in that data is what kinds of instruction was provided to different groups of students depending on class and teacher and things like that, different
Correct.
strategies.
Right.
Yeah.
That's correct. And there's a million different things, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, about all the things it doesn't tell you. And that's really the important thing, because those are the questions that you need to ask when you're doing a root cause analysis. So here's the data again, but what we're going to talk about a little bit is what can happen as we ask questions, as we look at this data, and then we're going to come back to it in a few minutes. And we'll be able to put both of them up at the same time. So when we're doing this kind of drilling down process, and we are an adaptive leader, we create this climate of safety and respect, as I talked about before. And it allows people to say what they're really thinking. It emphasizes growth and not guilt. And it really encourages reflective talk among staff. It provides this platform where we can have explicit discussions about disparity of race and achievement. It allows staff to talk about their struggles and to talk about what they don't know so that they can be non-defensive. And it encourages us to tell stories about our kids and really what the successes are. It helps the staff to see the impact of what they're currently doing and then make them believe that they can move on and really achieve things. The root cause is the most basic underlying specific reason for the presence of an effect or a result. Root cause analysis is this questioning of the status quo, where staff can see new teaching methods and test their theories in a culture of respect. So this drilling down process is you start with those summative results like I showed you for the elementary school a few minutes ago. And you identify significant student achievement needs. What is it that you want to work on? We can't work on everything in 1 year. So then you form a team, just like Jeff talked about, to ask questions about what more you want to know about that data. And that team then goes back and they can work with colleagues or do it themselves, and they collect data from multiple sources to answer the questions. They discuss the data and determine findings, which are nothing more than answers to those questions. And they decide if the findings are root causes, and then they begin to create that team's plan based on the root causes. I know I went through that quickly, and we're going to do it step by step. So going back to Orange Grove, what questions would staff generate to identify a critical student need at Orange Grove? And I'm going to quickly go back to that data. So what questions might they ask to help them analyze? And Jeff gave us one. He said, what was the teaching like in those classes that created a difference? You know, what are the teaching methods that are happening? So what else might we want to know? Happen to, here we are. So I'll let you look at the data and think about what kinds of questions, if you were a staff member looking at this data, what might you want to know about? Jeff, if you have any other questions you want to add, please feel free.
I'm typing one in right now, but I could just voice it as well. I was going to talk about looking at students more individually and their growth over time. Uh, right now you're looking at one large group or one
Yes,
large
yes.
to
So
try to
drilling down to even the student level and see if they
exactly, and
made
really
progress from last year.
because even if that African American population is just barely reaching the AMO, they may have made great progress from the previous year. So there may be some really good things happening in those classrooms. Um,
Exactly. We can't make
so,
assumptions, can we?
right.
And we another thing just to bounce off of what you're saying is that it may be the entire African American cohort made huge strides in math this year. We don't know by just looking at this data whether it was half as good last year as it is now, and that this is really a celebration, not as much of a worry.
Exactly. And I look at the Hispanic population as well being very high and wondering, have they always been that high? Did they make great growth or did they actually decline from the year before? We need to look at that more closely.
Right, or are there very few? Since
Right.
the limited English population is so small that it doesn't even come up on the score, I wonder, does that represent 5 children?
Mm-hmm.
Which doesn't take away from their success, but nevertheless,
Right.
we don't know any of that. So as I'm looking at this list, I'm saying, well, somebody's asking me about the format. It's, at this time, it was all on paper, given on the same few days all through the state. Some questions are, want to know the growth by grade, which is something that, like Jeff was saying, do we know that last year how they did? Do we have the same expectations for the African Americans? Were the LEP group with the Hispanic students? How do these compare to the local data? Special education, what is going on? Why are they not meeting AYP? Are they matching their services to the assessments? What grouping was used? Excellent, excellent questions. And this I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I was just going to add on to that special education piece too. I'm looking at the reading versus the mathematics, and although the mathematics is a little bit higher, it's not quite meeting the AMO. So I'm curious if looking at the assessment itself, is it the reading that's affecting the math scores
Yes,
too? There are a
yes,
lot of reading in the math assessment.
exactly. Good question. We don't, again, some of the questions that I would have come up with are what you are asking, but I also want to know, were the special education students given their interventions, not only for the assessments, but during the entire year? Do we know whether they received accommodations all year? And what did they look like? Were they appropriate for them? Do we have to look back at them? So we can go on and on and on. The other thing that we really need to know is, does the staff know how to teach children with special needs, the regular staff as well as the special ed staff? We don't know from looking at this, are they in a small classroom all the time, or is it an inclusion program like we have at my school? There are so many questions that actually this data doesn't tell us much more than it does tell us. And the problem is that too often we look at this and we say, oh, special ed's not doing well, so let's do X. And we may have really not attributed or really not gotten to the problem. So I'm going to move on to the next couple of slides. Let me move forward here where we were. So you said many of these. Some of them that I wanted to know is, do the children understand the content? Is their reading ability affecting their ability to succeed in math? Exactly what Jeff said. Do they have help with their homework? What interventions do they receive? Are students receiving on grade level instruction? I find a lot of times special ed students, if they're taught only below grade level information, that they don't move forward. We're constantly trying to scaffold them, and then they're not reaching their goals. So once the staff asked all the questions that we just talked about, you have to deploy the staff, and many of them, if you've brought the people who work with these children to the table, they often will know the answers to the questions. But sometimes you have to go out and look at last year's data, for instance, et cetera. And we're going to talk about an interrelationship diagram in a few minutes. So the one thing that I often find that especially teachers mistake is sometimes when we say let's collect data, that people get nervous because they think we're talking about those bars and whiskers and all of that. And actually data is often just observations or facts when collected, organized, and evaluated. It's information that's organized for this analysis. So we don't necessarily have to mean numbers when we're looking at data. So once we ask those questions, we're going to look for that data to answer the questions. This data, all the things that you were just telling me in the audience, really what it does is it reduces hunches, and it replaces this bandwagon approach with a cause and effect process. And we can identify the root causes with all these kinds of questioning and really digging deep into what's happening. It also produces professional learning communities because professional learning communities really are collaborative. They look at data. Learning is involved. And so it's very valuable for the community that you're working in. Obviously, in a nutshell, the data was insufficient. They don't indicate a root cause. And we should really never, if we can help it, use that one single source because we're basically guessing. So when we think about cause and effect, causes determine effects. And in order to change the effect, we have to change something that's the cause. And data must be used to discover those causes. So we mobilize the team. We've already talked about that. We bring them together. And Heifetz calls it mobilizing the stakeholders to tackle tough problems. Again, here's the drilling down. We're talking about asking all these questions. We collect the data from multiple sources. We discuss the data as a team, and we see if there's any root cause in there. So here's a visual of that same process. And we look at the student achievement need, and let's just assume for Orange Grove that we're going to look at the special education for now. We've developed some questions, and the answers to the questions may or may not be the root cause. So we collect the data, we find out what happened, the answers to all those questions, and then we look at them to see if they are a root cause. So you ask all of those questions, and one really visual way of working with your team is to have each of those questions similar to what you put on the answer sheet on an individual sticky, one question per sticky paper. And I created this framework for data collection. It was adapted from some research. And they've put these four large areas that kind of divide up the questions. Is the question that you write about student achievement? Is it about the instructional quality, the curriculum, instruction, and assessment? Is it about the school capacity? Do we have the knowledge? Is it about the principal's leadership, how we work together? Are we collaborative? And it's also could be about school policies, programs, and procedures. One of the things that often happen is many times if you're working with administrators, it will often be that the instruction quality is questioned. When you're working with teachers, I often find they write about the students. But it also can be that we just really need staff development, or that we need time for more collaborative planning. At my school, I've created 2 extended planning times for teachers a week, 90 minutes per week, so that they can plan and look at student data, student work every week. If you don't that's considered a school policy or a procedure. And so that kind of procedure, that kind of policy can affect the results of your questioning. And this data, this framework, is just a structure. It doesn't have to be done that way, but I find it's very visual. Staff can then go hang up their little stickies where they think it belongs, and you start to see, well, where are some of the needs in the school? Here's some sample questions then where I might put them. So somebody asked, what are the concepts and skills in which each individual student is deficient? That might go under student achievement. Assessment, how is formative assessment used diagnostically for reteaching? So are they just giving an assessment and then putting it in their book, or are they looking at it for flexible groupings? Programs, how effective is the current program for reading intervention? Instruction, what evidence do we have that reteaching is a regular practice? And school capacity, is staff knowledge sufficient, or do we need to create some staff development? So those are some sample questions and the place that I might put them on that chart. Then what I do is I typically make 4 teams, 1 for each of those sections, and we have folks answer those questions, and they may have to answer them together. But we find what are the answers, and it's not an assumption. They don't jump to conclusion. They're just answering those questions. And once we formulate those findings, there starts to be some real crossover, and people start to find the same answers over and over again. When you get to these root causes, they're not blaming, but we really start to see that there's no further questions that are apparent. We start to see some answers rather than questions. And the causes are important and worth our efforts. One thing that it says here is we can address many but not all root causes. We can't, there's also, as most of you I'm sure understand, there are certain things we can't do. We can't change what happens outside of our school. We can try to help, but we have to take on, for school improvement, things that we feel that we can make an impact on. So when we have a lot of root causes, you have to narrow those findings, because sometimes they have some sort of an interrelationship, and we can really narrow it even further. The teams will discuss what they found, and you might have several different root causes. Last year, in my school, we did a root cause analysis. Our special education and, well, specifically our Hispanic students were not doing as well. And after we did a lot of work together, some of our findings ended up that the students were not transferring and applying their learning. Maybe they were learning it in their small group intervention, but it wasn't being reapplied back in the mainstream. The children were not understanding the vocabulary, both of the questions and often in the written work they were being given. So they needed a lot of support with vocabulary. And we also saw that there was a lack of perseverance. Kids were giving up very quickly. And we ended up thinking that those all were root causes of some of the problems. We then put a lot of information on an interrelationship diagram. It's used to focus decisions. It determines if one cause has impact on another. And it forces us to really pick something, to come up with a solution. And everybody works together to create that. I do this just on a big chart paper, but I've created a similar interrelationship diagram here for you. So let's say that A through E are some of the decisions that the team has narrowed. We look at A and we decide, does A impact B, or does B cause A? You decide, and then you just leave the arrow where it belongs. So let's say we decided that A caused B. Then we move on to C. Does C cause A, or does A cause C? Or does C cause A? And you go around the circle, and you really go from one to the next, deciding where is the energy coming from. And for us, it really ended up being vocabulary and persistence. We really saw a need to concentrate more on front-loading vocabulary, helping kids understand, and it impacted comprehension. It impacted their being able to follow directions. And so we had 5 different things that we were looking at, and in the end, we decided to really focus on the vocabulary and the persistence. Helping
Ronnie,
kids, yes.
if I can interrupt, we're getting a lot of interesting back and forth in the parking lot. And if you wouldn't mind just scooting back a few slides to the drilling down process, I think it's slide 43. Because what you're talking about now is trying to rule out the different, or
Yes.
trying to identify the different root
Yes.
causes. But I think what people really want to find out is, all right, so you go through this process, and then that triangle there where it says, is the finding a root cause? How do you know that it's a root cause? What makes, is it a group decision? How does that?
Yes. Once you do this data collection and you get a lot of findings, which are answers to all the questions, certain causes seem to rise to the top. It seems to just come to fore. You know, you begin to say, oh, well, this thing is actually impacting this question, and this question. They say that when you have a root cause, you can't really ask any more questions. So sometimes you come up with a question, you answer it, and actually you then can go on and ask more questions. So if we go back to the simpler example of the NSL, we were saying, well, why was that inadequate? And when we got to the end and we said the review packet only concentrated on the second semester, well, I guess we could have asked why, but in terms of helping students, that was the end. We knew that there was a problem that was causing this. The children were not reviewing the information. And it's difficult to picture, but when you do real concentrated questioning on the data and go out and do the findings, you often will get to a point where there isn't any more questions to ask about it. You can just see, okay, this is a cause. It may not be the root cause, and that's what the interrelationship diagram comes up with. So one of the causes of our Hispanic students not doing well, we felt, was that they lacked the vocabulary to understand what the questions were asking, both in everyday work and also on the test. They were having trouble answering comprehension questions because they needed more help with vocabulary. Why was that? Because they were limited English. They were in ESOL. And so that was a conclusion. Does that help?
That's very helpful. I think another question that has been coming up is, this is a process that seems to require practice and time to do this. So who is brought into this, the root cause analysis effort? Do you select a small group from the school to
Right.
engage in this?
Mm-hmm.
How do you train them? How do you pick them?
Well, I think it's similar to what Jeff was describing. In every school in Montgomery County, at least, we have something called a leadership team. And it's a representative from every grade level and from our specialists. And often the staff development specialist is there, the reading specialist, the counselor. As I said, there's a person there from special education is represented. The ESOL teacher is there. So the entire school program is represented. The leadership team is a stipended program, so they get a small stipend for the year, very small. But part of their responsibility is meeting once a month after school for a staff meeting, if you will, but it's called leadership. And also during the summer. And during the summer, they're paid for 3 days. So they come after the children are not here. And usually in my school, we meet one day right after school gets out, so everything's very fresh in our mind. And then 2 days right before school starts, so that we have the advantage of looking at state and local testing, which takes a little time to come through. And then we create the SIP plan. But it's a beginning, because we do the root cause. It takes a few days. But the school improvement plan isn't due until October. So we have time to go back and really look further and really examine all of this. The other thing is that after we do this with the leadership team, then during pre-service, when all the teachers get there, we present this all over again. And each person on the leadership team sits with their school team and goes through the process again, helping them to see what they worked on as a leadership team. Because you want as many voices as you can involved. You want people to be able to give you information that your team leader may have missed. I also involve our paraeducator. We have a paraeducator on our leadership team, and they are involved during the summer as well. And then during the beginning of the year, once the paraeducators come, we present the data to them and we ask them for their opinions. Often they're the ones taking the children into the small little intervention groups, and we really need their voice. That came out of our leadership meeting last year. So that's how we work it, and the person who leads this process is really teaching people. It's a matter of really just asking the same questions that we started with a minute ago. Here's our data, and explain what this looks like, and then just start to, what don't we know yet? What do we need to know more? And because these are people that are closest to the action, they often have so much information.
Can I jump in as well?
Yeah, sure.
Can I jump in there? I just wanted to add as well that, one of the people in the comment box was requesting how do you involve the total staff, and we do have our set committee of staff members that's kind of from all levels of the school, but we do take a faculty meeting when we have everyone together too to get input as well, which is really helpful. And I think that is really important, and it's amazing when you get together as a committee with the teachers who are the ones that are really hands-on and in the trenches, so to speak, to see just the conversation just kind of leads itself as you begin discussing the data. Those root causes really do kind of rise to the top. And just for an example, we were looking at our data this year, and one of the things that kind of rose to the top, we first, of course, as we're looking at the data, are also thinking about, okay, what are our expectations for students? And when we look at the Common Core and things, and we're talking about responses to open-ended questions, we found that students needed more of a common language in answering those open-ended questions from kindergarten through 6th grade, and we built in a specific strategy to address that for instruction and then delivered it back through a faculty meeting to all staff. So, I mean, it really is, although there's a core team that does the planning, sharing that with all staff is really important, and we've found whole school faculty meetings a great time to do that. Another thing I just wanted to mention, I noticed somebody had mentioned in the conversation too, that it's difficult. You can't change your special ed population because they are special ed, and the special ed wouldn't be the root cause. The root cause would be the instruction provided to the special ed students that's not allowing them to make the progress that they could. So I just
Right.
kind of wanted to clarify that.
Well,
Very
I
can't.
agree with you 100%. And getting, just to answer the second comment, that's why this is such an important leadership role, because it really helps people to understand that this isn't necessarily because a child isn't learning, it's because we're not teaching, but it's not a blame game. It's really, what do we need to do? What do we need to learn? Do I know how to do this? When you do this collaboratively, it helps to take off all that blaming and just move forward to how do we make this happen. Going back to your whole staff, that's exactly what I was saying during pre-service. The leadership team then brings that down to the entire staff, and they all participate, look at what we've come up with, make suggestions, tweak it, and then we visit the plan multiple times. I mentioned before that we were just looking at our data and seeing that we still have some strugglers. And part of it is that we really need to find new ways of teaching. And that may not be within this school. We may need to look at some specialists coming in, or we're going to be developing some small professional learning communities next year and do some learning concerning the reading and how to teach different subgroups. So yes, and of course, the Common Core and the new park assessments, which we'll be moving over to next year, have really taught us a whole new way of learning, and we're going to have to adjust our teaching. And so that's going to be part of the discussion as we look at data again this year, is will our students be able to make comparisons, think so critically, read two different pieces of work, and make critical thinking about them, come up with their own writing. So that all remains to be seen, but that's part of the discussions we're going to be having.
Ronnie, one more question
Yes.
about the process. So you say that in Montgomery County, you do this at the beginning, prior to the beginning of the school year, as a part of the planning process. So does it happen just that once, but prior to the school year, or does root cause analysis happen several times during the year?
Typically, the actual root cause analysis only happens that once. Except if we start to find that our plan is not working at all, and then we might have to go back to the drawing board and say, whoa, this isn't working. In my case, what I really feel that's happening right now in our school is that we still know the root causes, but we don't have the solutions. And I think that's a very important distinction. We're dealing with, of course, people and children, and we may know what's wrong, but we don't know the medicine yet. And so we've made progress with some of the targeted students that we've been working with and looking at using our root cause, but some of them are not. And that's where we have to say, okay, that's part of that adaptive leadership. We need new learning. And we need to find out what it is that we need to do next. So we typically do that, but the leadership team meets, as I said, once a month, and we look at the school improvement plan and our actions that we're going to take 2 or 3 times a year. So in December, we took a look at the school improvement plan and the actions. Are they working? What we decided, is it working? And if not, what else? And what we found was we had too many actions and too much going on our school improvement plan. And in December, we actually focused it even more. When we started, it was much more broad than just the comprehension and the vocabulary. But we brought it back down a little bit so that we would really be able to monitor and see what we were doing.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. So we did the diagram, and as I said, you go through, and when you're all done, while these are double arrows, um, you decide one or the other. And in our case, we had all the arrows pointing to one or two things in the end. Because while these are all problems and they're all causes of the children not learning, some of them are the cause of the cause, which is the root cause. So just to summarize, another main benefit of doing a root cause is that it really does create this professional learning community. When you use this analysis, it's consistent with the tenets of a PLC. It encourages and takes advantage of the knowledge and talents of your staff. And the entire team works together, just as Jeff was talking about. We research, we diagnose what's happening, we prescribe new practices. If there are teachers from other schools that have just transferred, they bring new knowledge into the fore, and it really is a very collaborative process. So the big rocks that I want you to take away are that data analysis is essential for sustainable school improvement, and that an equitable leader uses teams of staff who are closest to the student achievement to collaboratively identify the problems and engage in this root cause. Schools have to dig deeply into the student data, including what students and teachers are doing daily in order for solutions to match the problems. And I think Jeff really talked about that a couple of times. We have to also look at the instruction. And this is something that Teresa was talking about. You need to invest time. It takes time. It's not an event. Root cause analysis and school improvement are not an event. It's a process that takes time, and it goes on all year. And equitable leaders understand that finding the root cause is an adaptive challenge and often involves loss, changing beliefs, and new learning. So sometimes people find what they were doing in the classroom may not be the right thing for certain students. They're going to have to change their process. It's a collaborative process. It involves adaptive challenges. And root cause analysis is an equitable practice because it prevents practitioners and leaders from making assumptions about students and staff, resulting in a failure to make change because they were solving the wrong problem. They were solving their problem with the wrong solution. So I'd love to hear what some of your key takeaways are. As a result of today's webinar, what actions or steps would you like to take? What's something that you might do differently?
I can tell you one thing, even somewhat into this, one thing I would like to do differently as the leader of our school is to build in more time, more of that planning time into next year's schedule, because although we do this, we do try to use faculty meetings, and ours is a committee that's a volunteer committee that I'm very fortunate that teachers are wanting to get involved in, but to build in time within the school day, like you mentioned the common planning time weekly. I think that's so important to revisit things and kind of reflect on how it's going.
Yes, our planning is planning. Our teachers don't discuss during their planning time, they don't discuss the field trips and how much money is collected and when picture time is. They really look at the plan, and especially with the Common Core, so much planning is involved. And what they do is, what I've done is, and the staff developers help me with the master schedule, is look at time when, let's say, early in the morning, somebody else goes into the third grade classroom and helps the kids unpack and takes attendance, takes the lunch count, and then they're, right after attendance is taken, they go to art, PE, music, or media. So a paraeducator or another employee will take those children and watch them while the teachers plan, so they have time before school, and then that becomes a 90-minute block, even though the kids might only be in their special for 45 or 50 minutes. They're here before school, and they continue planning. Same thing right before lunch, right after lunch. and right before the end of the day. So if you can put these planning sessions in strategic spots and have somebody help the students get to their specials, it takes a lot of work planning the master schedule, but it really does work to allow teachers to do that, to have that time.
And one of the biggest challenges, too, I was just going to mention was that whole piece about emphasizing the growth and not the guilt. That's a big change in mindset for teachers, and it's hard to look at that way. So that takes time to kind of change culture, and the whole idea we're all in this together and we need to work together and keep an open mind. And we're not evaluating you on this, but trying to figure out what's best for kids.
Right, exactly. Exactly. That's really key. Otherwise, you don't get the true answers to your questions. People have to really trust that this is not going to be any retaliation when somebody says, well, I didn't realize that I wasn't giving the right accommodations. I never really realized that. While they should have been doing that, well, it's done already. And if we're going to get to the bottom line, we have to really be able to say, okay, so here's what we need to do. Maybe we need to have an IEP at a glance that the special ed teacher makes for the teacher so they easily can see every day what they need to be doing for a student. So it's a very open dialogue, and since the special ed teacher is there, they can make they can have that discussion as well.
And just to piggyback on the idea of changing mentalities, one of the comments made, this is from Catherine Bradley, another benefit of learning root cause analysis is that the teachers and other staff members can use the same process on a smaller scale in their everyday problems. It helps you look at problems in a different way. I think that's a great observation.
That is a great comment. Yep. And it's a great culture, if you teach teachers how to do this. During that planning time, they can actually look at data when they bring the student work and they've taught, how to identify the main problem of the story, and the students don't get it. What is it that they need to do to change? They can use this process to really examine and ask those questions. It really does become part of the culture and the work we do for kids.
Well, one of the comments here is interesting. The suggestion is to involve students in the root cause analysis. What do you think of that idea?
Involve the students in the root cause analysis? I think at the secondary level, that would be a great idea.
Yeah.
It'd
be funny to get a third grader in there.
Yeah, I think with you have to be very careful because while the teachers are teaching and they have ownership, you don't want to make children feel badly. And because we're looking at data, we have to be careful that students don't come into the process and think, oh, our special ed students are not doing well, so what can we do to change it? I think you'd have to really organize the process so that you create some, you already have root causes and have them come up with some help with solutions, maybe helping to work on the plan rather than identifying, looking at data of children. That's just off the top of my head.
One way that we did involve students was our student survey. And being a K-6 district, we did survey third graders through sixth grade. And what we were really looking for was information about learning styles, what types of learners they were, which could help to drive instruction. So we did get student input in that respect.
That's great.
Well, and we have a similar situation. Remember, I said that one of the root causes we came up with was perseverance, and Kate Bradley, who's online, organized a survey of the students looking at their hope, looking at how do they feel about the future, how do they feel they can do better, and it was very helpful to see which children were not feeling hopeful and to plan some activities that really would talk about how do I do better, how do I keep with it, and that was a very powerful look at how students are feeling. So, yeah, you can involve students. I would have to really think a little bit more about how I might involve them in terms of the actual root cause. But I do think they might be very good at helping to find what is helping them. What do you find that helps you?
And parents were also mentioned as
Parents, yes, we do.
another voice.
I forgot to mention that actually on our leadership team we do have parent representation from our PTA, and so they are definitely a part of the process. I think it really, the last time when we did root cause last year and the parents were there, one of the parents came up to me when she left and she said it just made her heart just so happy to see the tremendous dedication and the work that was put into helping every student to achieve. It just really, really impressed the mom that was there that day. And it is impressive because it's just such a free flow of ideas, and you can see the dedication of what are you trying to do here. It's all about the children. So,
That's wonderful.
yeah, that was very exciting.
One of the questions that came up in the parking lot is, um, so you've gone through the root cause analysis. You've identified some root causes. What if you know the root cause but not the strategies for intervening?
Right.
Or if the way to intervene is beyond the ability of the district or the school, that you need other organizations to be involved.
Right. Well, places like REL are places where you might find other research. We certainly use all the research that's available to us on the web. There are very, very good specialists out there that you possibly could hire. In our district, there are all kinds of specialists that the math department, the reading specialists, whatever. Special ed has a huge department, and we can bring them in as support. And then there's a networking that should happen. I think that a good leader should reach out when you don't know what you need to do next, and go to other principals. For instance, I've never met Jeff, but I would love to talk to him again and see what are you doing for such and such, and just really do some benchmarking together. But I often see on my email, does anyone have a good program for intervention for vocabulary work or whatever, and really reaching out. Last year we brought in a reading specialist from Virginia who works in Arlington, and she really talked about close reading and looking at vocabulary, and that we knew that was on our new school improvement plan, and she did a staff development for the entire staff. So those are the kinds of things. There's many, that you can just all run. You can use any of the above and all of the above.
And I feel we have such talented staff as well. Just sending one staff member out to professional development outside of the district and then asking them to come back in turnkey has been really helpful.
Yeah, that's a good point. The training of trainers kind of thing.
Right.
Yep. Yep. Just today, one of my staff members went over to our high school because there was a visiting specialist talking about critical thinking, which really is a big part of the new Common Core. And I think he's going to be back in our district, and we were talking, the staff member just loved the training she received, and I'm going to see how we can involve her in a staff meeting to help us learn what she learned, but also to see if next year we want more people to go. So yes, definitely that whole idea of one staff member or two going out and and learning more.
And one of the suggestions that was mentioned in the Q&A was using the fishbowl technique to help train that. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, it is a great idea. It is a great idea. But, sometimes just sitting there and doing this, you just learn as you go, because it's really, lots of us know how to ask questions. And once you get through it, it really is exciting. to start to see everything gel at the end. Yeah. And as I said over and over, it really reduces the stress. It reduces solving the wrong problems. One time I was asked to go do a root cause analysis at one of our middle schools, and their 7th grade math scores had gone down, particularly their Hispanic boys. And I had looked over their data and saw that the trend was very interesting, because the year before, when they were 6th graders, they had just done very well. And first of all, it was very interesting to me that the students, the teachers and the leadership team that I was visiting with hadn't really examined any of the trend data, or weren't even aware of the trend data. But when I talked to them about that, they told me that the students, because they needed to go home and babysit, that they weren't coming to their after-school tutoring sessions, if you will, and that they thought that was the cause. And as we did our root cause analysis, we ended up finding out that the same day that those tutoring sessions are held, another teacher that happened to be at this meeting had created an after-school field trip to different universities for the children to see different universities in the Washington area. And on the very same day that the tutoring sessions were held, every week he took them to a different place. And I asked them, well, which would you rather go to, a trip to a university or sit in a tutoring session? And it was just like, wow, the assumption was made that it was a very, I thought, a very racist, if you will, assumption that because the children were Hispanic that they had to go home for babysitting. But they didn't look into what else was happening with these kids. And one of their own team was actually doing a conflicting program, which was a great program, but that's why they weren't coming. So just sitting down and talking about it and asking questions can often uncover some very interesting misconceptions.
Thank you, Ronnie. I just wanted to do a quick time check. We only have 10 minutes left in the webinar, and so I wanted to make sure that we had time to give folks a chance to ask, one or two additional questions, and then maybe, and then of course I'll do the wrap-up segment. Maybe I can toss over one of the questions that was asked prior to.
Sure.
Let me see. How were issues for the district identified? And so, is it just? Did you just you work off of the state standardized testing results, and then you work off of that? How do you know when you started? How do you know? How do you select the problem to initiate the root cause analysis?
And that's identifying the student need. So you really have to look at all the data you have and find where there's a weak spot, and you have to decide, okay, that's an area we really need to work on. And it becomes, there's a standard in terms of before, MSA, the Maryland State Assessment, always had a certain annual measurable objective, and so that used to be the standard we would go by, and then we would look at these others, the data like I showed you from Orange Grove, and see who wasn't making that, and that would be the beginning. And we also look at the local data. For instance, we know that there are certain children in kindergarten, first and second grade who aren't making our benchmark. It has nothing to do with standardized testing, but we can see that they're struggling. And so you kind of compare all of that and try to find, well, what is the student need?
Great.
Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. So maybe we should just go into wrapping up here.
Okay.
I wanted to let folks know that we will be, all of this, the entire webinar will be archived and available online, including audio. And so and you can, and the slides themselves you can download from the resources box, so there was no need to furiously take notes. There are many additional resources in the resource box, including root cause bibliography. So we invite you to download those and to share them with your colleagues. I want to also remind folks or let folks know that we do have a bunch of questions that we didn't get to. I'm thrilled at how engaged everybody seems to be. I mean, the sheer volume of comments is wonderful. This is really great to see. And so what we'll do is we'll put together like an FAQ kind of document and share that with all the attendees. We have your email addresses, and so we'll send out an e-blast so you know when that document is available. So I want to thank Ronnie.
We also wanted to let people know that we're going to be repeating the webinar on November 5th. So if anybody wants to come back or you want to tell some friends, we're going to be doing that again in the fall. And you have my contact information if you want to ask me anything personally. And I'd love to hear from you. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone.
Thank you so much, Ronnie. Ronnie and Jeff, I think your schools are very lucky to have you because you seem to be very, I mean, you're good leaders. I mean, just from the way you're talking about what you do, I think you guys are excellent examples of school leadership. So
thank you so much.
Thank you so much for
Thank you, and thank you for letting me be a part of this. I really enjoyed it. It's great meeting you, Ronnie.
You're welcome.
And so the conversation does not necessarily have to end here. We do have a forum on our website that you can continue discussions, debates, sharing insights and how you do root cause analysis at your schools. So we invite you to engage in those discussions. And I wanted to put in a plug for a few other resources. Of course, we've got some additional upcoming events, including Using Teacher Evaluation to Change Teaching from Dr. Courtney Bell. She is a very well-known expert in teacher evaluation, as well as The Effects of Restructured Teacher Pay Systems by Dr. Dan Goldhaber. He's a great presenter. He did a presentation for us last year and is very engaging, very involved. I also mentioned the Ask a REL resource in the parking lot, and we'll send along that link again. But that is also a way of, when you don't have the information, don't have the time to go to the local university and do research on your own, we can do a quick scan of the literature and answer questions for you. And so please, we welcome you to to use the Ask a REL service. And so I think that's it for our webinar today. Please do take a minute to complete our participant satisfaction feedback survey. We do take your feedback very seriously, and we use it to help improve our events, and we'd love to hear from you. And so it'll only take 5 minutes, I promise. Thank you, everybody, for your participation, and we will be coming back at you with those FAQs and the links to the archived webinar soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.